Good morning, dear students of class 12. Welcome to the online English learning class. Today we are going to further continue with the text of the lesson, The Enemy, Part 4. Now, in yesterday's class, we discussed how Dr. Sadao and Hannah, they jointly treated the prisoner of war. Hannah, being his wife, was always at the side of her husband like a dutiful wife. And she also assisted her husband, Dr. Sadao, in administering anesthesia to the prisoner of war. The operation was successfully performed and the post-operative care was further taken care of by Hannah and Dr. Sadao. We also discussed the reaction of the servants. The servants were quite opposed to the idea of Dr. Sadao and Hannah sheltering the prisoner of war in their house. Now we will further continue with the remaining part of the text. As for Sadao, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would in a fortnight be nearly as well as ever. So the prisoner of war was recovering. Sadao went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of police reporting the whole matter. Now the time had come when the prisoner of war had to be handed over to the Japanese police. So Sadao started writing a letter to the chief of police informing the incident. On the 21st day of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of my house. So far he typed, and then he opened a secret drawer of his desk and put the unfinished report into it. He did not complete the letter. He just wrote these few lines and then he placed the letter in his drawer. On the 7th day after that, two things happened. These two things were very important. In the morning, the servants left together, their belongings tied in a large square cotton kerchiefs. When Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done, the house not cleaned and the food not prepared. And she knew what it meant. She was dismayed and even terrified. Now, she was always having this fear that one day the servant might leave the house. And it had happened today. She did not find any work done and she could see their belongings were packed. But her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. She tried to put up a brave front by not showing what she was feeling. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her in the kitchen. She paid them off. She gave their dues and thanked them for all they had done. She was very graceful in sending them off. They were crying, but she did not cry. The servants showed their emotions by crying. They did not like leaving this house. They had been serving this house for many years, and they even before Dr. Sadao, during his father's days, some of the servants were serving the house. The cook and the gardener had served Sadao since he was a little boy in his father's house, and Yummy cried because of the children. They were attached to the family. She was so grieving that after she had gone, she ran back to Hannah. If the baby misses me too much tonight, send for me. I am going to my house and you know where it is. Thank you, Hannah said, smiling. But she told herself she would not send for Yummy, however the baby cried. She had made up her mind that she is not going to take the help of the servants any more. She made the breakfast and Sadao helped with the children. So Sadao also helped his wife. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond the fact that they were gone. But after Hannah had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sadao. Why is it that we cannot see clearly what we ought to do? She asked him. Even the servants see more clearly than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? So she raised this question to her husband. Sadao did not answer, but a little later he went to the room where the prisoner was and said brusquely, "Today you may get up on your feet. I want you to stay up only 5 minutes at a time. Tomorrow you may try it twice as long. It would be well that you get back strength as quickly as possible." So Dr. Sadao did his duty as a doctor. He saw a flicker of terror on the young face that still was very pale. "Okay," the boy murmured. Evidently he was determined to say more. "I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." So the prisoner of war showed his gratefulness to Dr. Sadao for saving his life. "Don't thank me too early," Sadao said coldly. He saw the flicker of terror again in the boy's eyes, terror as unmistakable as an animal. So when Dr. Sadao said, "Don't thank me," the boy was terrified because he knew what Dr. Sadao meant. Probably when the prisoner of war would recover fully, he would be handed over to the Japanese police. The scars on his neck were crimson for a moment. They were dark red for some time. "Those scars, what are they?" Sadao did not ask. So these scars were the injuries that the Japanese soldiers had given to this prisoner of war. The prisoner of war was badly tortured by the Japanese soldiers. Again and again there is mention of scars in the lesson. In the afternoon, the second thing happened. The first thing was the servants left the house. And the second thing that happened was Hannah worked hard on unaccustomed labor. She saw a messenger come to the door in an official uniform. Her hands went weak and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already, so she feared that this information might have been given by the servants, and that is why messengers were in the house to arrest Dr. Sadao. She ran to Sadao gasping, unable to utter a word, but by then the messenger had simply followed her through the garden, and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. Sadao looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other partition, which was thrown open to the garden for the southern sunshine. "What is it?" he asked the messenger, and then he rose, seeing the man's uniform. "You are to come to the palace. The old general is in pain." So the messengers had come, as they were called by, sent by the general to Dr. Sadao, as the general was in pain. "Oh," Hannah prayed, "is that all?" "All," the messenger exclaimed. "Is it not enough?" "Indeed it is," she replied. "I am very sorry." So she was fearing that probably the messengers had come to arrest Dr. Sadao. But they had come because the general was in pain, and they were sent by the general to call Dr. Sadao. When Sadao came to say goodbye, he was in the kitchen but doing nothing. The children were asleep, and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from fright than from work. She was very tired. Not from work, but because of the tension. "I thought they had come to arrest you," she said. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. "I must rid of this man for your sake," he said in distress. "Somehow I must rid of him." So it was time now to hand over this man to the Japanese police. Sadao goes to the general. "Of course," the general said weakly, "I understand fully, and that's because I once took a degree in Princeton. So few Japanese have." "I care nothing for the man, Excellency," Sadao said, "but having operated upon him with such success, yes, it only makes me feel you more indispensable to me. Evidently you can save anyone's life. You are so skilled. You say you think I can stand one more such attack as I have today? Not more than one. So the general was talking about his own illness, and Sadao was indirectly mentioning about the prisoner of war who was sheltering in his house. Then certainly I can allow nothing to happen to you. So the general indirectly mentioned that your life for me is very precious because my life can only be saved by you. The general said with anxiety. His long pale face became expressionless, which meant he was in deep thought. You cannot be arrested. Suppose you were condemned to death and the next day I had to have my operation. That shows that the general was selfish. Earlier also, he had not sent Dr. Sadao with the troop because he wanted him for his own ailment. And that concern the general had by saying that if you were punished to death for being a traitor, for harboring the prisoner of war, if I need you the next day for my operation, then what is going to happen? There are other surgeons, Excellency, Sadao said. There are other surgeons who are equally skilled than me. They can take care of you. None I trust, the general replied. The best ones have been trained by Germans, would consider the operation successful even if I die. The doctors were skilled, no doubt. Other doctors were skilled, no doubt. But they were trained by Germans. And because of their training, they would consider the operation to be successful and not bother about my life. I do not care for their point of view, he sighed. It seems a pity that we can not better combine the German ruthlessness with American sentimentality. As you've been trained in America, you are more sentimental. And because you are more sentimental and skilled, you can better take care of me rather than the doctors who've been trained in Germany, because they are more ruthless. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, and yet I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious. The general laughed. He had an unusual sense of humor. As a Japanese, could you not combine these two foreign elements? He asked. Sadao smiled. I am quite sure, he said, but for your sake, I would be willing to try, Excellency. So, I am going to go to any extent to save your life. This assurance Dr. Sadao gave to the general. The general shook his head. I had rather not be in the test case, so I cannot depend on my life for the Germans, the doctors who've been trained in Germany. He said he felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with cares of his life as an official in times such as these, when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South Pacific. It is very unfortunate that this man should have washed up on your doorstep, he said irritably. I feel it so myself. It would be best if he could be quietly killed. So the general is thinking deeply about this problem. The general said, not by you, but by someone who does not know him. I have my private assassins. Suppose I send 2 of them to your house tonight, or better any night. You need know nothing about it. It is now warm. What would be the more natural then? You should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden when he sleeps. So, you can leave the door of the white man's house open, and I would be sending my private assassins who are going to finish off this man in cold-blooded murder. Certainly it would be very natural, Sadao said. In fact, it is so left open every night. Good, the general said, yawning. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. If you like, I can even remove their body. So this job of eliminating the prisoner of war will be done very quietly. Even the body will be removed. So we'll stop here and we'll continue further in tomorrow's class. Thank you. Take care.